So drumming is an activity that's found across many mammalian species as an adaptation that involves a kind of costly display or conspicuous display in which the animal uses its feet and hands, sometimes sticks in the case of chimpanzees, to make a lot of noise, to jump up and down, to make a very conspicuous display that is often to warn about a predator. So it both advises members of the animal's group that there's a predator, and it also communicates to the predator. I see you, you can see how fit I am. Don't mess with me, go look for somebody else to eat. So it has the function of showing an excessive, well-being adaptation that dissuades the predator and also helps members of one's own group become aware of the predator's presence. This kind of conspicuous display in the case of chimpanzees is accompanied by choruses of pant hoots, where they make a long distance call that not only serves to let other members of their group know where they are, but also provides a kind of group identity in the sense that it progressively resembles the patterns of the vocalization made by the alpha males of the group. So as they all start to imitate the alpha male, it becomes a pattern that identifies their group, keeps spacing between troops, and contributes to their sense of a common identity in the trees. Now, this was definitely an area of proximal evolutionary development for shamanism because chimpanzees typically make very short bursts of drumming. I think 12 seconds is kind of an average. And of course, in the case of the shaman is known for going on drumming for hours and hours, even all night. So clearly the evolution of shamanism was in part the expansion of this capacity for drumming that in the case of shamanism involved using other objects to make a lot more noise, more than just a tree buttress or banging on the ground or one's own body. So community rituals are an important dynamic in all societies, and they have a particular socio-physiological dynamic that I'll only touch on here today. But they're also a dynamic that was part of the environment of evolutionary adaptation. And these costly, extravagant displays would have had a lot of positive effects in intergroup relationships and encounters with predators. And as Dunbar has pointed out, in the development of singing and dancing, they became capacities for eliciting the endogenous opioid system, for extending our ability to bond with other members of the group without having to engage in the individual one-on-one grooming that's typical of primates. So part of the evolution of the hominid capacity to live in larger groups involved the adaptations of singing and dancing, which provided these endogenous opioids, which make the group better bonded, feel better about one another, and of course, create alterations of consciousness that we'll look at next. So rituals then extended the function of integrating groups by providing mechanisms for relating unrelated social groups through engaging in this biogenetic basis of stimulating the endogenous opioid system and stimulating healing responses. So the biogenetic basis of shamanic ritual was expanded across hominin evolution, using rituals, using song, using dance as a way of extending the capacity of grooming and managing the social and emotional dynamics of the group. So one of the things that's clear about community rituals is that they provide a protective context, and in that sense can be seen as an extension of altruism, the care of others. And in this context, the expansion of the ritual capacity then enabled other kinds of adaptations to occur, such as healing, which we'll look at in a bit, the altered states of consciousness, as well as visionary experiences and spirit experiences, all of which we'll look at as certain kinds of integrations or releases of innate human capacities, ranging from endogenous healing responses to our innate intelligences. So the rituals were able to expand on the endogenous opioid responses and engage social, physiological, and emotional processes in a coordinated way. And it's involved the elicitation of endogenous healing processes through the social dynamics that elicit the opioid attachment mechanisms. We feel good with friends and others that we like because being with people we like stimulates our opioid attachment systems. It's part of an ancient dynamic of the dominant submission relations seen in chimpanzee groups, where subordinate individuals will be submissive and reach out their hands submissively to dominant groups because that interaction makes them feel protected, makes them feel good. We see also in the context of the expansion of ritual, the placebo effects, the hypnotic effects, and psychoneuroimmunological effects, which were stimulated by shamanic ritual. So the hypnotic response is in of itself an extension of the dominant submission dynamic. It's an extension of a capacity to use this kind of relationship to allow one's own nervous system to be relaxed and calm. And I think this is an extension of the capacity for dissociation. Can't go into it here, but trauma in close relationships produces dissociation, allows for a submissive dynamic to create a context in which people feel comfortable around people, even if they're not particularly nice. This hypnotic effect also involves something that's significant in shamanism, which is this ability to enter into a cognized social reality, to think about the world from the point of view of another person. Hypnosis involves the ability of someone to induce a state in you through suggestion reinforced by a dominant position. So another person is determining the social reality, and by determining the social reality that we believe in, we enter into a capacity to experience the appropriate physiological responses. So part of hypnotic and placebo effects is this ability to use interpersonal interactions to manipulate physiological responses. Looked at a lot of these aspects of shamanic healing in my book on culture and health. While it is a broad overview of applying medical anthropology principles, it looks specifically at how things such as symbols heal, how social relations heal, and how shamanism exploited these endogenous healing practices in creating a special kind of healing approach. Shamanic technologies alter consciousness in a lot of different ways. They do it through fasting, through sleep deprivation, the drumming, chanting, and singing, the dancing, exhausting exercises, through sensory stimulation overload as well as deprivation, sometimes being subjected to heat extremes, other times cold extremes, and of course, using psychedelics and other entheogenic substances. I'll suggest that all of these types of activities stimulate the same kind of biological bases that alter our consciousness. All these different kinds of procedures have a similar effect in that they synchronize the brain with theta waves, slow 3 to 6 cycle per second brain waves that originate in the serotonergic circuitry that links the paleomammalian brain and the reptilian brain. So our two lower centers of the brain are first getting stimulated through the serotonergic circuitry, and then this activation of the temporal lobes and the emotions eventually produces an ascending set of discharges that synchronizes the frontal cortex with the slow wave patterns that are coming out of these ancient primitive brain areas. I think that this is a natural mode of the brain. It's as natural to the brain as being awake or being in deep sleep or being in dream sleep. It's a mode of consciousness that I've called the integrative mode of consciousness. That is a form of psycho-integration of elevating the activities of the reptilian and paleomammalian brain and dumping their output into the frontal cortex. So the overall shamanic alter states of consciousness dynamics in the brain is this activation of the paleomammalian brain or limbic brain and emotional brain that is a specific area of the brain that's involved in things such as maternal bonding, mother-infant bonding, the opioid responses, social attachment processes. It's an area that's stimulated during play and nonverbal communication. So it's part of this ancient communication system that Paul MacLean called emotiomentation. And it's central to our sense of self, well-being, and identity. So this is what's being stimulated by altered states of consciousness. I think that there's a number of different ways in which humans expanded this natural capacity for altered states or the integrative mode of consciousness. One was through dreaming, particularly lucid dreaming. Another had to do with the effects of trauma, starvation, and how they result in things such as near-death experiences. Extreme running and the runner's high is another dynamic that I think is a key part of how it is that humans evolve these capacities to enter into healthy alterations of consciousness. And we can't leave out the natural substances, particularly psilocybin. I'm only going to have 2 or 3 slides on that. You'll have to read another article of mine to learn more. So dreams are a natural part of religious experience. Cultures around the world attest to the role of dreams in spiritual experiences, revelations from gods, origins of religions, and dreams, because of their strange nature, where you have a non-physical reality. I mean, how did you see people that have been dead for years? How would you in a place that you were, thousands of miles from? It's an immaterial reality and immaterial entities in dreams, and this must be one of the fundamental bases through which the inference about spirit world occurs, particularly when these dreams get elevated into special dreams that have consciousness, like lucidness. So most people who study dreams say, well, it's part of our unconscious structures. It's part of unconscious personality functions. And it's clear that these kinds of processes can be incubated by using rituals to link the dreaming and the waking mode of consciousness. So dreaming goes on extensively every night. We normally only get little pieces of it. But what rituals do is enhance the ability to link this back to consciousness. And notably, the shamanic ritual was an overnight ritual. So it automatically included dreaming in the process. What's dreaming for? Well, it's universal in mammals. So it's one of our ancient pre-adaptations. It not only manages emotions as we recognize in human psychotherapy, but it's essential for memory formation. Basically, it appears to have been an adaptation for kind of offline learning. We can rehearse, consolidate information, create memories during sleep. And it apparently is the kind of visual information processing that we have for all kinds of information. Hunt discussed this in terms of meditation as a presentational symbolism, a visual pre-verbal representation process that existed before language. It's all across the mammal species. And it's a representation process that not only allows learning, but it also allows various kinds of psychodynamic processes, particularly those from a pre-egoic level. We can also see it as a kind of virtual scenario construction process, a way to engage in a risk-free examination of different possibilities. You integrate different possibilities of the day in terms of assessing their potential usefulness for future social and cognitive options. So dreams, like shamanic visions, build up a scenario using this visual, spatial, imagistic intelligence that allows us to engage in a variety of different kinds of cognitive processes. So this image-based cognitive modality that existed for other mammals was exapted in hominids in the context of using overnight rituals as a kind of metacognitive system to integrate information and to represent that information in a way that allowed us to consider complex relations, options, to solve problems, and to engage in the kind of strategic planning and visionary decision-making that's typical of exceptional dreams. So dreams were the natural platform for the expansion of shamanism. And so this gave us more access to a kind of symbolism in which words are symbols. A picture is worth 1,000 words, is to say that when we look at what's represented in a picture, those symbols give us all kinds of meaning. It's not just one little item or symbol. It's a complex set of relationships that can be used for analysis, for analogical synthesis, integrating things together, as well as for diagnosis of situations planning, allowing the unconscious to bring the visions into consciousness in a way that we can access them and take the information back to waking consciousness. We also know that this kind of visual focus provides mechanisms for controlling biological processes, physiological processes, engages a relaxation response. So very set of powerful tools that were being exapted here in shamanism. So one of the biological bases for entering into these more extended altered states was trauma. Not only spontaneous trauma, injuries, long distance escapes, but things that naturally occur, fasting, pain, sleep deprivation, as well as overstimulation and heat and cold extremes. All of these, along with exhausting exercise, stimulate the serotonergic system, lead to a dopaminergic response, and induce this normal brain dynamic of psychointegration. So I would insist that the many different ways in which this kind of response in the brain, this 3 to 6 cycle per second theta ascending in the brain, is induced as it's natural to the brain. It's every bit as natural as eventually dreaming when you go to sleep. It also produces particular kind of experiences that we see in the relationship between trauma and near-death experiences. People can suffer trauma from accidents, from falls, from car wrecks, from drownings, and from surgical trauma, heart attacks. And a lot of people have a kind of near-death experience in which they experience something very much like the soul flight, where they separate from their body and they move into another space and they're experiencing a different world. And this is not something that just happened because of modern medicine. These kinds of experiences have been reported for thousands of years. Indeed, it doesn't require trauma and medical resuscitation. Some people can have near-death experiences with the out-of-body features just from being scared to death. Ultra running, a uniquely human capacity to run for hours and hours, also produces mystical experiences. It's probably a direct consequence of the overload of the 2 divisions of the autonomic nervous system, a spillover effect from overstimulation of sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. But these people who engage in ultra running have out-of-body experiences. They experience themselves floating up in the air and looking at themselves running on the path down below. They end up with this sense of overwhelmingly boundless energy, some kind of special connection with the universe, and many of the typical features of mystical experiences. So our evolved capacity to run for long periods of time led to these extreme stimulations of the autonomic nervous system that the shaman mirrors in dancing overnight, and also helps us understand why it is that humans have a peculiar, unique capacity for these kinds of alterations of consciousness, because there's only one animal that you have to run for 24 hours to get away from. You're running away from, the carnivorous cats. About 2 or 3 minutes is enough. The only thing you have to run for hours and hours to get away from is another human being. So what produces this soul flight experience? Well, we know that lots of different things can lead to it, not just exertion and trauma, but deliberate ritual activities and drugs. It occurs to people during meditation. It occurs during long distance running. Psilocybin can provoke it. It has to be understood as a natural response of the body that is something that emerges under a lot of different kinds of conditions. So what I propose is that we see in this the body mind, the mimetic mind that is being presented, but also being superseded. The soul flight experience, out-of-body experience, is very bodily conceptually, but in another sense, it's got nothing to do with the body as a physical entity. The body's offline. It's all here in your head. So this body capacity for representation is being moved into a visual symbolic realm that allows for extra personal cognition. So our normal body-based reference is being suspended in some very important ways. We're getting a body-independent form of reference that's being depicted through the visual system. And it can be used for a variety of different kinds of purposes as a symbolic system. And what I see particularly significant about this, and this is the extra personal functions. We're no longer being limited to what's here and now in front of us for consideration. By moving the body's representational system into the visual symbolic space, the contextual limits on this capacity to think has been removed, and we can extend our visionary cognition to other places, other times, project the other side of the mountain, project imagined worlds. So some philosophers recently have pointed out that what we see in the soul flight is the functional components of the mind or proto-mind, and the ability to separate the self-reference, the body reference, autobiographical memory, and the ability to move through space, to use those separately, to disconnect them from the physical body and just project our mental capacities. Of course, these kinds of experiences, such as soul flight, have to be understood as one of the fundamental ancient experiences that humans had that led them to postulate spirit worlds. Another part of this development of the capacity for altered states of consciousness has to do with the effects of psilocybin. And there's a lot of reasons to think that psilocybin was an essential component of the evolution of the shamanic capacity. I'll mention some articles at the end if I don't already have them later on in the PowerPoint. But psilocybin has been part of the environment of human adaptation since we had the hominin split. Since we came down out of the trees and started following cattle and similar ungulates around, eating them when they were killed by predators and eventually hunting them. We were following them and following their bullshit, cow shit. And that's where mushrooms grow. Most psilocybin species have a preference for bovine dung. So for millions of years, we've been looking for this stuff. And when we ate it, happenstance, something there, and later deliberately, it produced a set of experiences, visionary interactions with spirits, experiences of soul flight, unusual energies within the body, acquiring some kind of intuitive knowledge and understanding of things. Special experiences with animals are often reported, including this transformation into animals. And of course, as is all too often not true, but the case, people think, I'm dying, this is going to kill me. And then they undergo, an acceptance of their death and a remarkable kind of rebirth. Of course, both with psilocybin and with shamanism, we see altruistic action, people wanting to spontaneously cure, to heal others, to engage in protection of others. And we know psilocybin produces mystical experiences objectively. The double-blind clinical studies show that psilocybin has spiritual and mystical effects independent of expectation. So why was psilocybin so important? I'm going to be really brief here. It has to do with one of our serotonin-mediated responses to adversity. And one kind of serotonin adaptation system, the 5-HT1A, is a passive coping strategy. You just tolerate stress, you put up with it. But the ones that are mediated by the 5-HT2A receptors is an active coping strategy. It's an enhanced capacity to change perspectives, change behaviors, transform situations. And guess what? Psilocybin and the serotonergic 5-HT2 psychedelics preferentially engage the 5-HT2A receptor signaling pathway. So the signaling system that evolved to mediate rapid and deep learning when faced with environmental demands, giving us an enhanced capacity for change, increased adaptability and fitness. This is what was being stimulated by psilocybin. So we became better capable of adapting because we started encountering and consuming psilocybin-containing mushrooms. So these 5-HT2 signaling effects enhance cortical plasticity. We can learn better, enhance associative learning, put things together better, reduce stress, reduce anxiety, enhance our patience and coping strategies, and give us a greater plasticity for new kinds of adaptations that reflect the enhanced creativity and sociality. So we have looked at a whole wide range of ways in which psychedelics would have necessarily enhanced human evolution as an environmental factor, selecting for those of our hominid ancestors who were best capable of utilizing psilocybin as an analog for 5-HT2A receptor stimulants. And it had to do with a whole range of psychological and emotional capacities related to reduced fear, increased openness, extroversion, liking others better, enhanced cognitive processes, novel thinking and creativity, long distance connectivity in the brain. Psilocybin was a big part of our evolution, and of course, a key element in the transformation of the hominid nighttime communal ritual dynamic into something that reflects the kinds of things that shamans did across hundreds of thousands of years. But in general, what these altered states are doing is giving us certain kinds of enhanced adaptations. They're enhancing access to normally unconscious information. Basic action of the 5-HT2A psychedelics on the brain is to enhance the ability of the lower brain centers to transmit to the top. And they do so by ultimately disinhibiting this or blocking the serotonin mechanisms that disinhibit the dopamine systems. And so it's integrating these repressed reptilian, paleomammalian brain systems. And in doing so, it gives us a whole lot more information than we normally have access to. It enhances learning as well as unlearning, reversal learning, provides physiologically through these theta wave synchronized states, behavioral, emotional, and cognitive integration. So, and this integration is often exemplified in visions. We're back to this symbolic image system that underlies the dream mode of consciousness, but through ritual enables us to enhance our ability to encounter those unconscious potentials and integrate them into consciousness. Also, a whole wide range of general therapeutic effects of these altered states of consciousness. And these therapeutic effects range from the relaxation response and the increased access to unconscious material to extinction of learned patterns that come from profound altered states of consciousness, the enhanced ability to use visualization and mental imagery to change our sense of well-being, the psychosocial well-being that's enhanced by the release of the endogenous opioids. We're getting direct enhancement of the serotonergic system, which is the most important neuromodulatory system of all our neurotransmitter systems. And we're getting a variety of psychoneuroimmunological effects that come from hope and expectation and the sense of well-being that comes from participating in rituals in which our interpersonal boundaries are reduced and connection with others are enhanced.